Welcome to Honeybee, real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. My name is Philip, 22. Years ago, I was a different man with what I believe was a solid marriage and a future planned out. I worked as a construction foreman, putting in 12 to 14-hour days, sometimes 6 days a week. The pay was good, and I convinced myself that every extra hour was an investment in my family's future. My wife, Patricia, and I had 2 children, Emma, who was 12 at the time, and Gerald, who had just turned 8. The construction industry demands everything from you. I'd leave the house before sunrise and often wouldn't return until after dinner. Weekends were spent catching up on paperwork, checking job sites, or taking on side projects to bring in extra income. I justified every missed school play, every postponed family dinner, every exhausted collapse into bed as necessary sacrifices. Patricia seemed to understand, or at least she never complained directly about my absence. Looking back, I realized I was building houses for other families while neglecting to build anything meaningful with my own. But hindsight is cruel that way. It shows you all the warning signs you missed while you were too busy. Looking ahead, the revelation came on a Tuesday evening. I had finished a particularly demanding day overseeing the foundation pour for a new subdivision when I stopped by the mailbox. My neighbor Tony was outside, watering his lawn, and he called me over with that awkward hesitation people have when they're about to share uncomfortable news. Tony had lived next door for 8 years. He was retired from the Postal Service and spent most of his time tending to his immaculate garden or working on his vintage Mustang in the garage. He knew everyone's routines on our street, which houses had regular visitors and which lawns needed attention. He was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything but usually minded his own business. That evening was different. Tony turned off his hose and walked over to the fence separating our properties. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other before finally speaking. He told me that he'd noticed a pattern over the past few months. A man in a blue Chevrolet Silverado had been visiting my house regularly during the day, always when my truck was in the driveway. The visits lasted hours, usually from late morning until mid-afternoon. My first reaction was denial. I told Tony he must have been mistaken, that maybe it was a repair service or someone Patricia had hired for household work. But Tony shook his head and described the man in detail without mentioning the uniform of any service company. He'd seen the same man multiple times over several weeks, always during my work hours. The information was hard to digest, but I fought against believing it. Patricia and I had been married for 15 years. We'd built what I thought was a life together, created 2 beautiful children, weathered financial struggles and family losses. The idea that she would betray that foundation seemed impossible. But doubt, once planted, grows quickly in the dark. Over the next 3 days, I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Patricia seemed different when I came home, more distant, less interested in hearing about my day. She'd started doing laundry more frequently, and I noticed she'd been buying new clothes, things she claimed were necessary for school events or neighborhood gatherings I never attended. The breaking point came on Friday. I left for work as usual, but my neighbor wanted to show me he was right, so he sent me a photo with a timestamp. It was a blue Silverado, parked in my driveway that morning. I was trying to process what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to storm home and confront whatever was happening. Another part hoped there was an innocent explanation. I couldn't abandon the task. I was handling, so I thanked my neighbor and went on with my day. That evening, I came home at my usual time. Patricia was in the kitchen preparing dinner, acting completely normal. Emma was at the dining table working on homework, and Gerald was in the living room. It looked like any other weekday evening in our house. I waited until after dinner after. The kids were in their rooms. Patricia was loading the dishwasher when I finally asked her about the blue car in our driveway. I tried to keep my voice calm, giving her a chance to explain. Her initial response was confusion. She asked what I was talking about, claimed she hadn't noticed any unusual vehicles in the driveway. When I pressed for details, mentioning Tony's observations and the photo from that morning, her demeanor shifted completely. The denial phase lasted about 10 minutes. She insisted that Tony was a nosy old man who had nothing better to do than spy on his neighbors. However, when I remained persistent and made it clear that I wasn't going to let this go, she became defensive. The conversation escalated quickly from there. She accused me of emotional abandonment, of caring more about work than my family. She said I had no right to question her activities when I was never home to participate in our daily lives. She told me that Sam, the man with the blue truck, was someone she'd met at Gerald's school. He was recently divorced, understanding, and actually available for conversation and companionship. She claimed their relationship was purely emotional support. Two people who understood what it meant to feel lonely in their own homes. I knew she was lying, but the details didn't matter anymore. The trust was broken. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and I couldn't see any way to rebuild it. In my anger and hurt, I told her that if she needed support from another man, then our marriage was over. I expected tears, apologies, or at least some attempt at reconciliation. Instead, Patricia nodded and said that maybe that would be for the best. She told me she'd been unhappy for years and had only stayed because of the children. That conversation happened on a Friday night. By Sunday afternoon, Patricia was gone. I came home from a quick trip to the hardware store to find Emma and Gerald sitting on the front porch with confused expressions. Emma told me that their mother had packed several suitcases and loaded them into a taxi. She'd hugged them both, told them she loved them, and said she needed some time to figure things out. The house felt hollow without her presence. The kids kept asking when their mother was coming back, and I had no answers to give them. I tried calling Patricia's cell phone that evening. She answered on the fourth ring and spoke as if we were discussing something mundane. She told me I was free to live my life however I wanted, that she wouldn't stand in my way. When I asked about the children, she said they would be better off in a stable environment, and clearly I could provide that better than she could. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. She hung up, and that was the last meaningful communication we had for over 2 decades. I contacted a lawyer the following week, my sister Pam, who worked as a paralegal at a family law firm downtown, helped me understand the divorce process. She connected me with her boss, an experienced family attorney, who agreed to take my case. The legal proceedings proved more complicated than I expected. Serving divorce papers to Patricia required tracking down her location, which took several weeks. She was staying with Sam in an apartment across town, a fact I learned through a private investigator the lawyer recommended. When Patricia finally received the papers, she refused to sign them. She also didn't contest them in court or hire her own attorney. She simply ignored the entire legal process. which created a bureaucratic nightmare that stretched on for months. My lawyer explained that we could obtain a default judgment if Patricia continued to avoid participating in the proceedings. This meant the court would grant a divorce and custody arrangements without her input, but it required following specific legal protocols and waiting periods. The process took nearly 8 months to complete. During that time, I was essentially a single parent while still technically married. Emma and Gerald adjusted to their new reality with the resilience children often display, but I could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. Emma, being older, understood more about what had happened. She asked direct questions about why her mother had left and whether she was coming back. I tried to be honest without damaging her perception of their mother entirely. I told her that sometimes adults make decisions that hurt other people and that her mother was dealing with problems she couldn't handle properly. Gerald's response was different. He became quieter and started having nightmares. He would wake up crying and ask if I was going to leave, too. Those moments broke my heart in ways I hadn't known were possible. Managing work and single parenthood required completely restructuring my life. I reduced my hours as much as possible without jeopardizing my job, which meant taking a significant pay cut. My boss, understanding the situation, allowed me to adjust my schedule so I could drop the kids off at school and be home earlier. My sister Pam became invaluable during this period. She picked up Emma and Gerald from school 3 days a week and watched them until I finished work. My mother, who lived 2 hours away, drove down every other weekend to help with household tasks and give me brief breaks from the constant responsibility. The financial strain was immediate and severe. Patricia had contributed to our household income through her part-time job at a local insurance office, and losing that income while simultaneously taking on legal fees created serious budget problems. I had to refinance our house to cover the attorney costs and create breathing room for daily expenses, but the emotional challenges were far more difficult than the financial ones. I had to learn how to be present for my children in ways I'd never been required to be before. All the responsibilities Patricia had handled became mine alone. Emma started having problems at school. Her grades dropped and her teachers reported that she seemed distracted and withdrawn. I arranged for counseling through the school district, which helped both children process their mother's abandonment in healthier ways. Gerald developed behavioral issues that manifested as defiance and testing boundaries. He would refuse to follow basic household rules and throw tantrums. When disciplined, I learned that this was his way of testing whether I would abandon him too, and it took months of consistent responses to rebuild his sense of security. The default divorce judgment was finalized nearly a year after Patricia had left. I was granted full custody of both children with provisions for visitation if Patricia ever chose to establish regular contact. She never did. The years that followed were a gradual process of building a new normal. Emma and Gerald slowly adapted to life with just their father, though they both carried emotional scars from their mother's abandonment that influenced their relationships and trust issues. For years, I learned to navigate the complexities of raising children alone. Emma excelled academically, despite her emotional struggles. Throwing herself into schoolwork as a way of maintaining control in her life. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and earned a full scholarship to study engineering at the state university. Gerald took a different path, struggling with authority figures throughout his teenage years, but eventually finding his passion in athletics. He earned a partial scholarship to play baseball at a smaller college and graduated with a degree in sports management. Around the time Emma started college, I met another woman, Lynn. She was a teacher at Gerald's high school who had helped him through some difficult periods during his junior year. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than the passion and naivety of my first marriage. Lynn understood that my children would always be my priority, and she never tried to replace their mother or force a relationship they weren't ready for. Emma and Gerald appreciated her presence without feeling threatened by it, and over time, she became an important part of our family structure. By the time Gerald graduated from college, both children had established successful independent lives. Emma was working as a civil engineer for a consulting firm in the state capital, and Gerald had been hired as an assistant coach for a minor league baseball team. They both maintained regular contact with me, but had their own apartments, relationships, and futures to build. I thought the chapter involving Patricia was permanently closed. 21 years had passed without any communication from her. The children had grown up, built their own lives, and processed their mother's abandonment as best they could. Then on a Tuesday evening, Patricia appeared at my front door. I didn't recognize her. Immediately, when she spoke my name, her voice carried the same inflections I remembered, but it was weaker, more hesitant. She asked if she could come inside and talk to me. My first instinct was to refuse to close the door and pretend this moment wasn't happening. But curiosity and perhaps some residual connection to the woman who had been my wife and the mother of my children made me step aside and let her enter. She looked around the living room, noting changes I'd made over the decades. Her eyes lingered on pictures of Emma's college graduation and Gerald's wedding, milestone she had missed entirely. Patricia sat down carefully. She told me she had breast cancer stage 4 and that her doctors had given her less than a year to live. She said she was undergoing treatment, but that the prognosis wasn't good. She began explaining what had happened after she left. Her relationship with Sam had deteriorated quickly once they were living together full-time. He was an alcoholic, something she hadn't fully understood when their relationship was limited to afternoon visits while I was at work. His drinking led to emotional abuse, then physical violence, and eventually complete financial control over her life. She had tried to leave him multiple times, but had nowhere to go and no resources of her own. She'd burned bridges with her family when she left me and the children, and she had no friends who would support her decision to abandon her responsibilities. The abuse escalated over the years until she was essentially a prisoner in Sam's apartment. He monitored her activities, controlled her access to money, and threatened violence if she tried to contact her children or me. She said she thought about us constantly, but convinced herself that we were better off without her. Sam died of liver failure 3 years ago, and Patricia had been living alone since then, working minimum wage jobs and trying to rebuild some semblance of independence. The cancer diagnosis came 18 months ago, and the medical bills had consumed what little savings she'd managed to accumulate. She told me she wasn't looking for forgiveness or trying to justify her choices. She said she understood that her actions had been unforgivable and that she had forfeited any right to be part of our family. But she wanted to make peace with the past before she died, and she hoped to see Emma and Gerald one more time. I listened to her entire story without interrupting. When she finished, I told her that while I appreciated her honesty, I wasn't the person she needed to seek forgiveness from. If she wanted to make peace with the past, she needed to speak with Emma and Gerald directly. She asked if I would help arrange meetings with them, and I explained that they were adults who could make their own decisions about whether to see her. I gave her their phone numbers, but made it clear that I wouldn't advocate for her or try to influence their choices. Over the following weeks, Patricia contacted both Emma and Gerald. I learned about these conversations through my children, who called me to discuss their mother's reappearance and ask for my advice about how to handle the situation. Emma's response was direct and uncompromising. She told Patricia that she had needed a mother during the difficult years of adolescence, during college stress, and when she was building her career. She said that Patricia's absence during those crucial periods couldn't be forgiven with a deathbed confession, and that she had no interest in developing a relationship. Now, Gerald's conversation with his mother was longer, but reached the same conclusion. He told her about the behavioral problems he developed after she left, the trust issues that had affected his relationships throughout his 20s, and the therapy he'd needed to process her abandonment. He said he was glad she was seeking peace, but that he couldn't provide the absolution she was looking for. Both Emma and Gerald asked me how I felt about their decisions, and I told them I supported whatever choice they made. Patricia had been absent during the years when they needed her most, and they had every right to prioritize their own emotional well-being over her desire for reconciliation. Patricia called me one final time after speaking with both children. She thanked me for giving her their contact information and said she understood their decision not to see her. She told me she was grateful that I had raised them to be strong, independent people who could make difficult choices and stick by them. She also thanked me for not turning them against her during the years after she left. She said she had expected them to be filled with hatred toward her, and she was surprised that their rejection was based on principles rather than anger. I told her that I had forgiven her years ago, not because her actions were forgivable, but because carrying anger and resentment would have damaged my ability to be a good father. I explained that forgiveness was a choice I made for my own peace of mind, not a gift I was giving to her. That conversation happened 6 months ago. I learned through Pam, who had maintained some distant connections to mutual acquaintances, that Patricia passed away last month. She died in a hospice facility alone, which I found sad despite everything that had happened between us. I called Emma and Gerald to inform them of their mother's death. Neither expressed regret about their decision not to reconcile with her, but both seemed relieved that her suffering was over. We didn't attend the funeral, which was a small service arranged by the hospice staff. Looking back on the entire experience, I don't regret the choices I made or the way I handled Patricia's return. My responsibility was always to protect and support Emma and Gerald, and I believe I did that successfully despite the challenging circumstances. The years of single parenthood were difficult, but they taught me lessons about resilience, patience, and unconditional love that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Emma and Gerald became my closest relationships, and the bond we developed during those challenging years remain strong today. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had handled the initial discovery of Patricia's affair differently, or if I had been more present during the early years of our marriage. But those questions don't have meaningful answers, and dwelling on them serves no productive purpose. What I know for certain is that the experience taught me the importance of being present for the people who matter most, of choosing forgiveness for my own peace rather than as a gift to others, and of supporting my children's autonomy even when their decisions are difficult to accept. Emma and Gerald have both built successful lives and healthy relationships despite the trauma of their mother's abandonment. They learned lessons about commitment, responsibility, and the importance of being present for the people who depend on you. In some ways, their mother's absence taught them things about strength and resilience that her presence might not have provided. Today, I'm grateful for the life we built together despite the challenging beginning. The experience taught me that families are defined by presence and commitment rather than biology or legal documents, and that love is demonstrated through consistency and reliability rather than dramatic gestures or emotional appeals. The most important lesson I learned is that forgiveness is a process, not a single decision, and that it's possible to forgive someone while still maintaining healthy boundaries. I forgave Patricia for my own peace of mind and to model healthy emotional processing for my children, but that forgiveness didn't obligate me to welcome her back into our lives or to encourage my children to do so. Emma and Gerald made their own decisions about their mother based on their own experiences and emotional needs, and I supported those decisions because respecting their autonomy was more important than any abstract notion of family reconciliation. In the end, we became a stronger family because of the challenges we faced together, and that strength has continued to serve us well in all the years since.